Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely fascinating, a really beautiful perspective on human connection, specifically looking at the life cycle of a long marriage. We're drawing from the profound notes of a marriage counselor who actually learned more from couples in their 70s than from any textbook out there. So, the counselor shares this incredible story of a couple named Samuel and Grace. Now, Samuel and Grace had been married for 47 years. And get this, they walked into the counselor's office not because they were in crisis and not because anything was broken. They came in simply because they wanted to understand what they had built and to find the right words to pass that wisdom down to their kids and grandkids.
So picture this. The whole catalyst for their visit was this one exact question, asked by their youngest grandchild. It literally stopped them both cold. As Grace told the counselor, she just looked at Samuel, and Samuel looked at her, and without a single word passing between them, they both just started laughing. And we're not talking about a polite little chuckle here. It was a kind of laughing that comes from a place so deep and so profoundly shared that it doesn't need any explanation, no setup, no audience. It was the laugh of two people who share an entire private universe. Okay, let's dive into this, starting with a kind of uncomfortable truth about young love. Early marriage love, for all its amazing electricity, is largely about the self. It's this wild neurochemical storm of dopamine and oxytocin, heavily focused on how you make me feel, how desired I feel, how chosen I feel. Your partner basically acts as a mirror, reflecting your absolute best self back at you. But as the counselor points out, this is really just the starting point. The kind of love that actually endures across decades gradually shifts its center of gravity. It moves away from what I receive and moves toward what I get to witness. It goes from the thrill of being chosen to the quiet, staggering privilege of sticking around to see who you are becoming. Which brings us perfectly to Section 1, the early years, or as we're calling it, fermentation. To truly wrap our heads around this shift, the counselor uses what is basically a perfect chronological metaphor, the winemaker's journey. Let's look at the messy, pressurized beginnings of this journey. In winemaking, wine doesn't become complex and beautiful despite the fermentation process. It becomes beautiful because of it. The darkness of the barrel, all those crazy chemical tensions working themselves out, that is literally where the magic happens. And you know what? Early marriage is exactly the same. It's the intensely uncomfortable, pressurized adjustment of two fully formed humans, each with their own completely different history and nervous system, trying to form a genuine partnership. It was never, ever meant to be a completely smooth process. So the crucial point here is that the friction you experience early on isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just think about these incredibly common struggles. Arguments over whose family to visit for the holidays, those intense, stressful negotiations about money, terrifying seasons where one person is just growing way faster than the other, or even temporary seasons of emotional distance. We so often mistake this pressure for evidence that the marriage is failing, but actually, scratch that, this is the marriage fermenting. The couples who actually arrive at that sweetness later on are the ones who stayed in the barrel. They didn't take their unfermented cells and run off looking for a fresh start that promised to be easier. They understood that the pressure is totally necessary for the relationship to evolve. So you survive fermentation, and then you hit Section 2, the middle years, or construction under pressure. Let's move to this next chapter and see how it builds. This period is arguably the most underrated and misunderstood chapter of any relationship, and sadly, it's where most divorces happen. Because from the inside, it really looks like a loss of passion. You're dealing with the massive seismic shifts of parenthood, incredibly demanding careers, aging parents, and just this relentless bone-deep exhaustion. It's the absolute loudest season of life, and that imagined destination of a calm, sordid life just keeps receding further into the distance. But from the outside, from the vantage point of, say, 47 years, what it actually is laying down foundational depth. You are literally laying sediment. You are seasoning the barrel of the relationship through your quiet, consistent presence on a crushing, exhausting Tuesday. Every single time you choose to stay in the conversation instead of walking out, every time you forgive something genuinely difficult, every time you choose the marriage over your own ego, you probably couldn't see it happening in the moment. And honestly, that is exactly the point. It's these unsexy, heroic, daily choices that mean the sweetness is being built in the dark. And then the room just gets brighter. Let's look at Section 3, the later years and the gifts of the vintage. After all that invisible work, something profound shifts. The later years bring these specific, truly staggering privileges that only time and endurance can give a couple. The first is the gift of being known. Samuel shared this incredible realization with the counselor. He said, Grace knows things about me that I have never said out loud. She knows them simply because she paid attention for 47 years. He realized that Grace didn't just see who he wanted to be, she saw who he actually was, in all his brilliance and his ordinariness, and she was still right there. Being witnessed in your absolute entirety and being chosen again, continuously, is an exclusive gift of staying. Then, you get to gift of shared history. Long-married couples build this living language, their own private civilization. Get this, Grace and Samuel actually invented a single word that encapsulates the absolute hardest chapter of their life together. When something hard happens now, they just use that one invented syllable, and they are instantly reminded of how far they've come. You simply cannot rush or buy that kind of shorthand, right? It literally takes decades of shared life to write it. They also receive the gift of tensile strength. Young love, as beautiful and exciting as it is inherently a bit anxious because it hasn't really been tested yet. But a love that has been right to the edge and stepped back together, that develops a settled confidence. And it's not complacency at all. It's a quiet peace. This peace becomes the solid ground from which a deeper, less frantic, and much more intentional kind of passion grows. And perhaps the most surprising gift of all, falling in love again with someone you already know. Society constantly tells us that familiarity kills romance, but that's a total myth if you keep paying attention. Listen to this. In his 60s, Samuel just randomly decided to learn how to paint. He was terrible at it, but he didn't care at all. Grace watched him, entirely surprised by this new, playful freedom in him, and she fell in love with him all over again. As she so beautifully put it, after 40 years, a new room. A long marriage never runs out of new rooms if you just stay curious. So, how do we actually get there? Let's break down section 4, ingredients for the sweetness or the winemaker's work. And this brilliantly illustrates that it isn't just about passively letting time pass. We have to pivot to the active, intentional things these long-hauler couples actually do to achieve this vintage. First, they stay continuously curious. They never assume they have their partner 100% figured out. They actively choose the friendship, genuinely liking each other even when the erotic passion naturally ebbs and flows. Crucially, they fight for the marriage, prioritizing the relationship way above winning an argument or protecting their own ego. They grieve together in the darkness rather than retreating to their own separate corners during the hard times. They practice intentional gratitude. Yes, they still say thank you for the coffee after 40 years. And finally, they make peace with imperfection. They realize that the real, flawed person they married is actually far more fascinating than the idealized version they imagined on day one. Which leads us to our final takeaway in section 5, the secret of presence. All of this active work leads to one ultimate beautiful realization. As the counselor's time with Samuel and Grace came to an end, they asked Samuel one final question. What do you know now about marriage that you wish you had known at the very beginning? Samuel was quiet for a really long time, and then he delivered this incredibly profound piece of advice. He said he wished he had known that the goal was never to be happy. The goal was to be present. Happiness comes and goes. It's a guest, not a resident. But presence? Choosing to actually be there in the messy life they built together, regardless of how he felt on any given day, that was a decision he could make. And making that decision to show up over and over for decades, that is what happiness actually is. It's not a feeling you find. It's a life you build. The sweetness of a long marriage is absolutely not a myth, and it is definitely not just luck. It's available to anyone who is willing to stay present through the fermentation, through the intense pressure, and through the dark. So the question we want to leave you with today is simply this. Will you leave the wine in the barrel? Will you commit to doing the unsexy, heroic work of staying present? Because as Samuel and Grace have so beautifully shown us, absolutely nothing in this world compares to the vintage it eventually becomes. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will catch you next time.